Does your home contribute to your health, or does it contribute to allergies or maybe sleep disruption? Is it a place of relaxation where you can see green spaces, or is your view concrete towers? It all matters, and the International Well Building Institute provides a standard to guide us in making changes to support our health. It's called the Well Building Standard. Today's guest is Linda Kafka, and among her many other talents and credentials, she is a Well Accredited Professional. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to welcome back Linda Kafka. If you didn't catch our previous podcast with her, look back over our podcast because you will love that one. But today, we're going to talk about the Well Building Standard. What is that? Well, Linda's going to tell us. If you could give us the Well Building Standard 101 and tell us a little bit about it, that would be just terrific, Linda.
Hey, Karen, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me. And yes, I am Well AP accredited. And this is not a term that the average consumer would know about. It's really a trade term or something that the trades, especially interior designers and architects, use in building. And so what it is, it's really about how the elements within the building, and I'm talking commercial buildings at this point, or healthcare or hospitality or educational, any public type of buildings. How do those elements affect us as human beings and our 11 body systems? And why I study this and why I became Well AP is there's so much information in the Well Building Standards that I can take to the residential environment. I truly believe everything happens at home. Everything begins at home. And so, if you've got bad indoor air quality, poor lighting, acoustics, it's going to affect you. And then you go out into the world. And as we all know, and I don't really need to repeat this, but I'm going to say it for argument's sake, we spend a significant amount of time indoors. We spend more than 90% of our time indoors. So think about it.
Some would say too much.
Yeah, too much. You spend it inside your home. You spend it inside the vehicles because most of us live in very car-centric environments or cities or even suburban, urban, like they're very car-centric. You've got offices that we work in, schools that we go to, shopping malls that we spend our money in, entertainment places. We're constantly in the built environment. And so the Well Building, I decided to pursue the Well Building Standards and become accredited in that because I wanted to really understand how these various elements within our space affect us. And unfortunately, we don't, it's just really coming, into play now, but we really never had a focus on residential. It was always really about commercial. And so when you think about this, we go out into the world, they make these buildings better for us to work in or to thrive in. And then we go home and we come into an environment that is not so healthy. So in a nutshell, the Well Building Standards was really developed to look at how the built environment and the elements in the built environment affect our body and our body systems, including our mind. And so we look at, in the Well Building Standards, we look at 7 concepts, I believe it is. So we're looking at the water quality. You're looking at the lighting. You're looking at the air. Nourishment is one, and I'll explain that one. We've got fitness within those buildings. So, the walkability to the buildings, the use of stairwells, use of stairs as opposed to elevators. And then we also talk about comfort in mind. So let me give you an example. Air, light, and water, probably the largest of the categories. I want to look at air to begin with. We bring into our environment a lot of pollutants. Every one of you listening knows that. We bring in particulate matter of very small or slightly larger sizes. It comes in all shapes and forms. We poison the air in so many different ways. A great example, and many people can really relate to this, is that new car smell. Oh my God, my mother, she loves the new car smell. And I say, do you realize how toxic that is?
You can buy spray to spray in your car that mimics the new car smell. I know, even worse, right?
Great, even worse, because now you're putting all those little particulate matter in the air, and what's happening is we're breathing it in. And so the Well Building Standards, what it does is it's a building assessment that if you follow, whether you're renovating the building or you're building new, if you follow these standards, you can receive, a silver or gold or platinum certification on the building to say that this building is well certified, and we've taken into consideration all these different things that can affect the human. We don't yet. I want to say we aren't really pushing that in the residential sector. So we are exposed to a lot of different things that we bring into our homes, or things that we, like light, that are already existing in our home that affect our hormones, affects, our recovery if we're ill, affects our immune system, affects our nervous system, in very small ways, but over time it adds up. And so when you're doing renovations, and why I like to have this conversation with people, especially aging in place, when you're doing renovations, for instance, you're really degrading the air quality within your space. You're perhaps, breaking through walls that God knows what's in them, and God forbid, I hope there's no asbestos in those walls, but which you would have to do some type of mitigation for. But you're bringing that drywall dust. You've got the off-gassing of flooring. You've got the off-gassing of paints. All the materials. Everything has an off-gassing to it. And so, if you're working with renovators, you want to really make sure that your renovator is cognizant of the fact that all of these products. I mean, they're aware of the fact that they off gas, but you want to make sure that they're cognizant of the fact that, you don't want that happening within your space, especially if you've got somebody that's got respiratory problems or other allergies or so on. And so you want to know their cleaning protocols. If they're creating any kinds of dust in your environment, how are they mitigating that or reducing that? How are they cleaning up afterwards? Are they even going so far as to clean the filters in the furnace to make sure that it's not just recirculating through your space? So there's a lot of things that you want to consider. And when I look at the WELL building standards, why it's important to me too is that I also identifies what body system it affects. So if you look at, for instance, lighting, and lighting is, oh my God, lighting is so complicated. It's even complicated for people that work in the industry. But we've got so many new products out there, the LED lights that emit a blue light, and blue light suppresses our melatonin, affects our hormones. We can't fall asleep. We need that melatonin. Think of the way the sun works, circadian lighting. Early in the morning, it comes up, it peaks at lunchtime, and then at dinner time, as it starts to move towards rests and put our body into that restful state. And we're producing melatonin so that we can fall asleep. Now you've got, you put blue light or lighting into your space that disrupts your sleep patterns. It's going to be harder to fall asleep and to stay asleep. And so you've got a whole bunch of problems that can arise. And so by understanding the WELL building standards, you can take a lot of this information. And by the way, it's downloadable for free. So you just have to type in WELL building standards and look at some of the things that they're doing in the commercial spaces and bring that into your own home, or at least have that conversation with your renovator. How are you actually, looking at our health and our well-being with this aging in place renovation that we're doing? Because it's not just isolated aging in place, zero threshold showers, widen doors, put lever handles in. It's also about our health and our well-being. And so what are you doing to make sure that you're not introducing problems that I'm going to have to deal with at a later date?
The first time I remember hearing about the importance of air and light in our environment was at the Livable Design Summit, which Linda founded, for those of you who don't know. Tremendously educational platform. But over the space of a couple of years, the first year I heard about it, and I thought, well, isn't that interesting? The second year, though, I really took it in, and there was a really good talk. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the individual who gave it, but it was about air quality. And I very quickly, while he was talking, did some research on air filters. At the time I was living in a condo, and all I could think of was, I'm breathing the same air as all these people in the condo. It's not just me. It's everybody who lives in this condo. And I ran out at the end of that day's events to Canadian Tire, and I bought 2 of the air filters that were highly recommended and brought them home. And I noticed a difference by the next morning. And I just went, so much better.
The HEPA filter.
Very important, right?
Yeah, very, very important, because you've got filters that will filter out different scents and smells. You've got other ones that will filter out the tiniest particulate matter. We introduce the most toxic room in our home is the kitchen. It's the most polluted. Think, like, why? Why would that be the most polluted? Depending on the device that you're cooking on, depending on oils and the foods that you're cooking, you're releasing a lot of carbons and brown carbons into the air. Toast, for instance, just toast in the toaster, brown carbon coming into your air. You've got cleaning supplies. You've got human beings in there. We emit formaldehyde off of our bodies and others. Like, there's so many things that are coming into that one little space that is so toxic. And so one of the things that's really important within that space is making sure that when you go to replace your appliances, that you're not just looking at the actual, hey, this great stove and or range and this great refrigerator and this microwave and this dishwasher, but the vent hood. And there's some really great products out there. And if am I allowed to mention a brand name?
Sure, go ahead. Because we link to things that people recommend. Go ahead.
Okay. So one of my favorites is Fotile. It's a brand that comes out of China. The research and development is all in out of Germany, and then they have their own pristine facilities in China that actually build these. They have multiple products, appliances for the kitchen, but their range hoods are incredible. And what I love about them is they have a VOC, that would be a volatile organic compounds. Those are those off-gassing that we smell, the new car smell. It can detect if there's an elevation in VOCs or toxins in your space, and it will automatically turn the fan on. So you don't even have to think about it. It does all the thinking for you. And that's the kind of products you want in your space, because you can't smell. You don't know when you're breathing in all this particular matter. Yes, you might be able to identify a new car smell, but you've got, dust and debris and things that come in, just on the bottom of your shoes onto your carpet area. If you're the kind of person to walk in your home that way, you're introducing so many different things into your home. You don't know how polluted your area is. And that's what I like about these devices that are constantly monitoring the air quality and then automatically turn on to clean the air for you.
Just a little side note, Fotile makes an absolutely amazing in-sink dishwasher.
My favorite.
Right? Isn't it great?
Yeah.
So for anybody who wants to age in place and that bending to get at the dishwasher under the counter, I mean, you don't really have to put dishwashers on the floor. They can be raised up, but let's skip by that. If that becomes too difficult for you, this dishwasher, love it.
I know, and I'm so excited. It does more than just that. So it literally is a sink and a dishwasher, and it fits right into the counter. It's one unit. And so the dishwasher itself will hold up to 4 place settings. But this is the part I really like.
Me too. I know what you're going to say, and I love it too.
Most people don't know about this. It has a feature on the dishwasher that actually you can put your fruits and vegetables in it, and it will clean the pesticides off of our fruits and vegetables. And so that setting is superb. It's not a big unit, but it's a good size unit. So you've got your sink on one side, your dishwasher that also can clean the pesticides off of and sterilize, fruits, vegetables. It depends on the setting you put on, bottles, all kinds of things. And so I think you've got that 3-in-1 that's really going to support your health and wellness journey and your aging in place journey.
The one downside of it is that if you are somebody who cooks a lot with pots and pans, there really isn't enough room for it. But I think the plus minus on that if you get the ramped up model, because there are 2 models, at least the last time I looked, there were 2 models. There's the basic, just does your dishes. The ramped up model does the fruits and vegetables, and the plus minus on that model, I'll wash pots and pans.
Yeah, you know what? Also, you remember when we had that, when we did our podcast about aging in place, and I talked about the different things that you need to do before you actually go through your renovation.
Absolutely.
That part of that conversation is about how much more am I going to be the entertainment home? As much as we want to keep tradition, at some point you have to say, you know what, it's time to pass that baton on to my daughter-in-law or my daughter or my son or my son-in-law or my other family members, my sisters or siblings. It's time to pass it on and let other people do that heavy cooking. And how often do we really do it? Like, you've got, how many holidays are you really cooking for? And so you're right. The offset of that is, you've got the advantage of a great dishwasher. It's easy to reach, no bending. You can take the upgraded model, have that 3-in-1 where it's cleaning your fruits and vegetables, so you're not constantly eating toxins and poisons, which you know, our produce is covered with them. You can have that, and as opposed to having to cook the meals and do the big pans and all that stuff. Like, comes a point where you stop doing all that stuff and you let others do it.
Right.
So
And back to
there's a trade-off.
stoves for a minute. When I moved into the house I'm in now, I so desperately wanted a gas stove because I love cooking on a gas cooktop. But I paid attention to all the stuff that was being talked about at the summit, and I got an
Not good.
induction. I have a gas barbecue out on the patio outdoors. You
Yep.
can actually, I've cooked pies on a gas barbecue before. I mean, you can do anything out there on a gas barbecue that you can do indoors. I love my induction stove.
It's it's so important. About 5 years ago, I was talking to an appliance dealer, a retailer, about gas stoves, and we at that time we were already hearing from California that they are looking to ban the gas stoves because they emit so much carbon and there's so much pollution that comes off of them, and they're not good for the environment either. And so I really got, I kind of, that was their number one seller. So, to hear that this is not good and you should not be selling these and you should be moving towards other appliances, and it did not, that conversation did not go over well. But having said that, I still stand by the fact that, introducing, and I had a gas stove. My son was, he was going through for culinary, and chefs prefer to cook on gas. And I love the idea, not just the cooking on the gas, but I also love more that whenever there was a power failure, my gas stove would always work. So that's one of the main reasons why I got it. But it does pollute the kitchen, and you have to be aware. And if you are going to keep your gas stove, which, aging in place, it's not a good product. Induction is much better, but
No, it's not.
for
It's
safety
true.
reason. But make sure you've got a hood fan that really does extract the pollutants that come off of gas cooking. That's really
Absolutely.
critical. And so
It's
you learn that in the well, like you won't learn per se about residential appliances in the well building standards, but you'll learn enough about the air pollutants and how to mitigate that, and the results of what it actually does to our bodies. And so that's why I like the well building standards, because it gives me some kind of framework or guideline to work with.
right. So once you understand some of the guidance that's being given, you can apply that to the
Yeah.
residential environment. Now, you talked also about lighting and the importance of that. And I agree, as I get older, lighting becomes increasingly important.
Yeah, you know what? We have one, almost every home you go into, every environment you go into, there's one setting on and off on your lighting. Yes, people have dimmable switches, and they kind of, create those for mood. And, in the evening, you want to kind of have it a little bit more darker. And, if you're entertaining, it sets the mood or whatever. But here's the thing that, that's really important is that we're moving towards circadian lighting. And as I said earlier, circadian lighting is a rhythm. It's a rhythm within our bodies, our circadian rhythm. It moves with the sun. So as the sun comes up, it's at its peak, it starts to go down, we get ready for sleep, and then the cycle starts all over again. And what we're seeing is more and more companies starting to introduce circadian lighting systems. So they're available in the home, and through the well building standards, there is a lot of discussion on light, and it talks about artificial versus natural light. So we really want to encourage natural light wherever we can within our spaces. So if you can add those skylights, or you can widen or increase the size of windows, it's not just the light coming through, but it's also the views that you might be able to get, the views of nature, if you're fortunate enough and you don't live in a concrete city or a glass city, as Toronto has become. But that's really important. And as a matter of fact, I'm heading to Sweden at the end of the summer to study the impact of darkness on the human. And so what better country than the Nordic, because they have a lot less light, and they spend a lot more time in darkness or have a lot more dark hours. And it can affect your mood. It can cause depression. There's so many issues that come with poor and bad lighting, and especially artificial lighting.
Right. And now you're talking about affecting mood. Do I remember correctly that emotions are one of the categories of the well designed building standard? Or how things affect your emotions?
Well, actually, you know what? That's really more, and then on a future podcast, as I talk about neuroaesthetics and the human brain, and and how that was kind of a journey that I had gone on educational wise, and as I teach interior designers and design professionals and renovators about our built environment, emotions and how we connect to our space is very much important. And we are in the century of biology now. And yes, the Well Building Standards is starting to recognize and look at neuroscience. So that's our brain. I look at neuroaesthetics, so our brain on beauty. Beauty obviously is subjective, but there are elements to create environments that are aesthetically beautiful. Nature is probably one of the best examples. We have a balance of organized complexity. We've got fractal patterning, for those that don't know fractals. And we'll talk more about this. If you'll invite me back, I'd love to do a presentation on biophilic design.
100%, we'll have you back.
Yeah, we'll talk more on that one. But the idea here is to see, you want to, it's not just how we, like aging in place, if I had to bring it down to the most basic, like simplest terms, it's really about vertical and horizontal circulation and range and reach. So how we get into a space, how we maneuver on that ground floor horizontally, how we get up to other levels or down to the basement, the range and the reach that we have, whether it's up or down. I'm crossing across this way or whatever. Outlets, you don't want your outlets to be too low to the ground. You want to raise them up so you're not having to bend down and reach. Think of yourself in a chair position if you had to reach up to touch the thermostat or turn lights on. So that's kind of aging in place. Then we move towards the Well Building Standards, which is about how our body systems, whether it's our endocrine or, the glands in our body or the organs in our body, our skin, our respiratory, even our brain, nervous system, there's 11 of them, how they all react to what we've brought into those environments. And that would be, like I said earlier, the water, the light, the air, it's looking at all those and how it affects us. And then the next phase that I've gone towards, the final phase, is how do we emotionally connect to our spaces? So yeah, emotions is part of it. And so in the Well Building Standards, we look at emotions can affect everything. So acoustics, for instance, they've done a lot of research in the commercial world or the workplace world that, employees have stated that, one of the biggest stresses that they have is acoustics when they're working in an open floor plan and hearing conversations, being distracted, people overhearing them, noise that's happening down there. That all affects your stress levels. And so that affects ultimately your mood and so on. And your hormones. So you're increasing your cortisol. So that's that's the negative one. That's the kind of fight, flight, freeze. We want to be in a rest and digest where we're really feeling calm within our environment, lowering our blood pressure and so on. And so you're right. It does affect our emotions, and there are physiological responses to our environments. So what we want to do is we want to strive to have better environments that not only we move through, not only support all of our body systems, but also support our emotions. And so you'll see that in the Well Building Standards, but there's a lot more beyond the Well Building Standards that talks to that.
I wonder, as I was listening to you talking about that and office spaces and people in little pods next door to each other, during COVID, people started working in many industries at home, and now offices are wanting to bring them back and people are resisting. And I'm sure that it's partly because it's more convenient for them. They don't spend money on transportation and clothing quite the same way. But I wonder if subconsciously there's something that in their minds that understands that they are far more relaxed in an environment that isn't as cluttered and noisy.
Yes, because we're human beings. And
Right.
think about it, where we came from 40,000 years ago. Where were we 40,000 years ago? we, we were in nature. We were living in nature, and we evolved from nature, and our bodies and our brains, evolved over time. We have a natural affinity to places that make us feel, we seek pleasure and we avoid pain. And to go to the office and you're in a space that has fluorescent lighting, no views out the window, why does the president always get the office with the windows and everybody else doesn't? Because there's a limited amount of windows in buildings, and so you're on the bottom of the totem pole, you're getting the worst office. But I remember working in an environment where we were constantly moving our offices because we were leasing out the spaces that we would occupy. We'd renovate them for ourselves, and then we'd end up leasing them. And I remember one of the units that we were in had fluorescent lighting, and 3:00, you could almost set your clock to it. Around 3:00, 2:30, 3:00, 3:30, we were all complaining about headaches. And we were in a closed environment. We didn't know what time of day it was, and so it really suppresses our instinctual or our evolutionary inheritance of being connected to nature. And that's what we need to look at. We're in the century of biology, human biology. We're looking at so much research. I just got back from Boston studying eye motions, where we were looking at eye tracking, facial expression analysis, galvanic skin responses, and using that on how do we have better design outcomes for health and well-being in the built environment. And so what you're finding is the trades, architects are certainly leading this, interior designers are getting behind it, product specialists. We're all starting to look at the built environment differently. Unfortunately, residential is the last frontier. It's the last place we look. Why? Because there's so many variable factors. Firstly, it's budget, whether it's a new home build or it's your home that you're renovating, DIY projects, lack of knowledge of the new products that are coming out. There's so many reasons why, the homes we're not up to speed in our homes as the way we are in the commercial world. But consumers are starting to pay attention to this. Why do I feel really great in this particular room or in this particular environment? And then when I go to my home or other places in my home, I'm not feeling so great. We look at the function of your spaces. Everybody, before COVID wanted all open concept. Tear down the walls, make it all open. And I'm not saying don't do that, but there's a downside to it. Now, during that pandemic time, we found ourselves working at home, schooling at home, learning at home, entertaining at home, like cooking at home, all of those things. And we found that maybe it's not so good to pull all those walls down because we don't have private zones. And remember, everyone in the family is functioning at a different level. So what motivates you might not motivate your children or motivate your husband. And so we look at spaces. I'll give you another example. Like, for instance, if you're creating an office at home, you might need it to be really focused. So what does that mean in terms of temperature, lighting, colors, ergonomics of the furnishings, sit, stand, desks, so on? If laundry is a task that you absolutely hate to do, which some of us guilty, I hate to do, it piles up and piles up. Maybe, having it really a motivational, brighter colors or favorite imagery or things that really make me excited to want to go into that space, even if it's just opening closet doors and the inside is painted in an exciting color that kind of makes me jump. There's things we can do in our spaces to really help us from an emotional perspective. And although well building hasn't really, I think the next versions will start to include more of that. There is a whole movement in neuroaesthetics that that I teach in and that I'm learning myself in, but I'm also teaching in, on how we emotionally connect.
Right.
And how do we improve our health and well-being, our heart rate, our blood pressure, just reducing our stress. And that's important. So that was a good question to ask, Karen. Thank you.
You invited me to be part of the eye tracking study, and it was fascinating. It's very brief, but it was fascinating, and it wasn't hard to see where my eye, and I'm sure most of the participants' eyes would go. It was
And you know what?
to outdoor elements, right?
Absolutely. So that happened to be a biophilic. So bio meaning nature, philic meaning love, love of nature. That's what biophilia is. And so what we're doing is we're bringing into not just our homes, but into the built environment offices to lure people to come back to work. More natural elements, more rounded curves. Remember, there are no right angles, or very rarely do we see right angles in nature. And so that whole idea of linear, and there's a lot of research on this, linear lines. If you're staring out a window and you're looking, let's say, at a glass tower, because your condo happens to face that way, or your office, there is research that demonstrates that looking at parallel lines for a significant period of time will actually cause headaches and increase depression. So again, it's really about us as human beings from nature. Parallel lines cancel themselves out in nature, so we don't have that same harsh look of those lines. So these are the things that we're studying, we're researching, and that biophilic study that you participated in was to demonstrate on a smaller scale to design professionals how important it is to create human-centered design. Look at um, the humans that are occupying that space, whatever reason they're there, whether it's in a residential space, whether it's the area you cook, the entertainment, the sleep sanctuary you have, and not just create it, create it really for that individual or for those individuals so that they can thrive in that space. And so all of these biometric research tools help us to validate design outcomes, or help us to improve design outcomes, and validate a lot of the decisions that might be made for that space. So that's what we were doing with the biometrics.
It was fascinating, as is everything to do with the Well Building Standard. And I know that we could probably go on and talk for hours about it, but we will link.
It's free. It's a free download. Put that link in there. It's a free
Yep.
download. Now you don't have to print it out. But you know what? Just reads. Now you don't need every single, like, there's sections in there on fitness. There's sections on nourishment. So the sections on nourishment would be, say I want to get our office tower well certified, and we have a cafe on the ground level. How does the food that they're serving in that cafe? So think of checkout. Often at checkout, you see the gum, the chocolate, the potato chips, the junk food, all the stuff we love. Maybe it's replacing it with, under nourishment category, it would be replacing it with an apples, bananas, giving, it's called architecture of choice, and giving choices that are more healthy. So that concept in the Well Building Standards might not apply to you as residential. Comfort in mind, there is elements in comfort in mind that would be like thermal comfort, mind, biophilic design, views of nature. So there might be some takeaways there, but ultimately it's a great reference if you just want to get a little bit of an understanding of how these different elements like light and air and and you learn things. I want to share one thing as a good tip for your listeners. When you when you purchase, let's say, an air purifier in your room, ask or find out if it's emitting ozone. Now, up until the Well Building Standard, I always thought ozone was something that kind of protected the earth. I was, oblivious to the fact that that equipment actually emits ozone. And what happens is that if you are in an enclosed environment and you've got devices that are emitting ozone, it will deteriorate your lung capacity. So a good example is photocopier machines. Photocopier machines, I used to have my own printing business. We had photocopiers. It was a closed environment. And if you're working in that, what's happening is the ozone is being emitted off of those machines. It's going to affect your lungs at some point. Long duration, it's going to affect your lungs, and you're going to have reduced lung capacity. I don't want to scare you to think that one air filtration system that you're putting in your bedroom is going to have the same effect as a whole bunch of photocopiers in a room. But you want to mitigate any possible potential things that's going to affect the quality of your life. And so you should know, or ask or read the packaging. Don't just buy it because it looks pretty or it's got lots of reviews. Like, take that extra step. And that's what the Well Building Standards did for me, I didn't even know about that until I did the Well Building Standards. It's going to give you insight and aha moments, the filters you should use, the lighting you should use. Again, it is focused on the commercial public spaces, but there's so many good takeaways for residential. So don't discount that.
And it's free. It's free. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for joining us on this podcast and explaining all of that to us. And for our listeners and viewers, I will include links to all of that in our show notes. And I will also include a link to Photile because you've got to check that out. Thank you very much for joining us. And please join us again for the next episode of Real Life Renos, the podcast.